there's a chase sequence middle of the film through Los Angeles that requires, very precise white pans and transition points because while it looks like an 8-minute oneer sequence, it's probably about 10 to 12 shots. I was brought on board by Alejandro. Our very first days were shooting those chase sequences. We had an Arri Alexa stripped to the bare with the Teradek and follow focus and then sprinting full speed down the street while doing whip pans and trying to keep the level. And it was an extreme challenge, but it was also super gratifying when we got the shot.
Hey, I'm Josh Apter, Filmmaker U, filling in for Gordon Burkell. And at Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru with the u.com. And please make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on the socials to stay in the loop on all the things we're doing over here. So every week we interview a working professional. And this week was no different. We're joined by cinematographer Trevor Roach, an Indiana native, now based in Los Angeles for the past 10 years. Earned his MFA in cinematography at Chapman University and was a 2016 Student Kodak Cinematography Award nominee for Look at Me. And then he shot his thesis film, Esta, Cuba, which won multiple awards, including a Student Academy Award, a Student Emmy, and it was also nominated for a BAFTA. He is here to talk about his background, how he got into cinematography, and his work on the film City of Hope. Hey, Trevor, how you doing? Thank you for coming and joining us today. How are your sea legs going? I heard you were on a boat for the last 4 days.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, it's just recovering. Was on a yacht for the last like 4 days doing a charity documentary for some war veterans and their PTSD, and documenting just kind of them recovering from obviously the hardships of war. A lot of these vets that we were with and following were in Afghanistan multiple tours. So it's my first time doing that event, and it was quite the experience. Now I'm sharing phone numbers and contact info with each other. We're all um, sharing photos from the event. We caught like 70 fish over the course of
Oh
four
my
days.
God.
I had never caught a fish that big before, so it was a really cool experience.
How
And
big were these fish?
oh, I mean, hey, we caught a 130-pounder tuna
Oh my
one of the
God.
days. So yeah, it was out in the Pacific Ocean. It was a really, really cool event. I mostly do narrative, but whenever I get the opportunity to do documentary work, it never ceases to amaze me just being able to connect with the people that we're working with and the stories that we're getting to share.
Well, I was going to make some joke about you being fresh off the boat,
Yeah,
but there's nothing to hook into, so I said it. There's
I
no
see the
punchline.
hook.
Yep, there you go. Wow. But it's interesting that you bring it up because you say that this isn't, you don't shoot a lot of nonfiction documentary. I know from reading your bio that you did get your start. You were shooting a lot of sports, which you could consider it's in the nonfiction universe. I also think that, as a craftsman, as a cinematographer, you do the job, right? There's a different set of tools that you're using, but it's the same toolbox. And I think I would love to talk more about that, like what your approach to shooting something that's nonfiction versus fiction. But before we do that, I kind of want to get a sense of, you know, where did the interest in cinematography come from? Everybody's got that like moment where like that's what I want to do. So what was it like for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a family where my uncle was like a professional photographer, mostly,
Mhm.
doing like the sports photos for the local middle school and high school football teams or sports teams, but wedding photography, event photography, things like that back in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I grew up. And he bought me my first like little digital point and shoot camera when I was like 11, and I immediately figured out a way to shoot like 30-second clips video on it.
Uh-huh.
And he was a huge impact on me in terms of just taking me to events, getting me excited about making images. My dad was also a huge supporter of just like always capturing everything. My dad had, the Super 8 or the Video 8 cameras always going on family vacations or family
Mhm.
outings, and he documented everything. So when he passed away a couple years ago, my brother put all those videos together online, and it's an amazing time capsule of my entire childhood, which is
Yeah.
something I really cherish now that I've lost him. But I had a upbringing of like image makers in my family, even if they weren't necessarily in terms of filmmakers, they still love to just capture life, and they invoke that in me. And it's something that kind of carried forward, and I went into making YouTube videos when YouTube started getting really popular at the beginning of 2006, when
Hmm.
it first came
Well,
out.
you're
My friends
dating
and I were
yourself
making
here.
a
How
little
old?
bit, yeah,
Because
a
you're
little
like
bit.
Super 8
I'm
and video 8
34
says
now,
one
yeah.
thing. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm 34 now, so I'm right at the beginning of the YouTube era was when I was a teen, and I mean it was exciting to have an ability to make, short films with your friends over the weekend and then upload them to YouTube. And you'd get like 20 views or something like that. But as a teenager, like to be able to express yourself and be creative like that to the world was really exciting. And so from there, I went to grad school, or sorry, undergrad to Butler University. I got my degree in like video production there. So I was doing a lot of
Mhm.
sports broadcasting. I was traveling the country, being a camera operator for a lot of sporting events, a lot of college basketball, things like that. And I mean, I was doing like AAA baseball for the Indianapolis Indians, where I was the cam op on the roof, which it's a pretty hard job being the wide shot that zooms in as the ball follow. If they
Mhm.
hit a home run, you follow the ball all the way out to the outfield. So, um, right from like a freshman in college, it was a great experience to learn how to operate. But sports are um extremely long hours. The film industry is too, but there's something that's lacking from the creative side that I always just kind of longed for. And so after a few years of doing that out of grad school or out of undergrad, I applied to a few film schools. My uncle, who I mentioned previously, he sadly started to develop cancer. And through that process, he really encouraged me to make sure to chase my dreams of going and pursuing a film career. And there was a point where he actually kind of had a stroke and was in a coma for a few days. And when he woke up from the coma, he had severe brain damage. So he was kind of saying things like doggy, dog food, not much else. And then I remember specifically getting off work one day and visiting him in the hospital after he got out of the ICU, and just telling him how I was thinking of applying to a few grad schools for film and cinematography and kind of just seeing where it went. And it feels weird to say or crazy to say, but out of nowhere, he looks me dead in the eyes and says, "Do it, do it."
Mhm.
And then just kind of went right back to, and it just, I lost him a few months later, but
Mhm. But those moments of
I got into,
clarity, I mean, that's a real thing. I've heard of people
yeah,
communicate like that level of communication. You reach someone and it's impacted your entire life, you know?
yeah.
It's a great story. And I mean, anyone who's lost somebody, they sort of know that those are their precious moments.
I sort of got into VFX by accident. I always had a technical interest in photography, and especially as it relates to movie making. There's something magical about the ability to believe something is happening when it isn't. So I went as a live action producer into a company called Bob Abel and Associates. Then I would have to, have a meeting about how do we do this effect that's in this commercial, and I never got the straight answer I was looking for. I have camera knowledge, so it's like, since it's kind of ambiguous, why don't I just grab a camera and we'll try it out. You have to figure out what tells the story and use every trick in the book to solve your problem. I am Rob Legato, and this is my course on visual effects.
I do want to, I mean, obviously we're going to go forward, but like there is an urgency to this sort of nonfiction side. I wonder if it informs some of the work you do in fiction also. Sports and weddings. So you're talking about being a wedding photographer, wedding videographer. I remember I knew people who did it. I did it myself. There's no take two. You
No,
miss the ceremony, you miss I do. It's not like you walk up and say, "Hey, that was great, but we had a problem with the audio. Can you like that's it?" And so you have to get really good at anticipating things. Like with a home run hitting the outfield, you got to be able to
no.
get in there and follow it. And just kind of anticipate moments. I think there's something about that that it's, it's not unique to it, but as in terms of just getting a sense of things and intuition as a cinematographer, it's a great training ground.
Absolutely. I mean, instincts are something that like are natural, but it also is something you develop. And it, I only did one wedding as a videographer. I did a few as a photographer, but they like after dealing with a bit of a tough client, like as a teenager, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. But uh it's instinctual. You have to try to capture the moment, but also I
Mm.
think you need to, and I've learned this the further I've gone along, especially in doc work, and then it's transitioned into narrative. Sometimes those mistakes where maybe you don't capture it perfectly actually end up
Mhm.
being perfect. I know that sounds off, but sometimes the authenticity of a moment is more important than getting the
Mhm.
perfect shot or getting the perfect lighting or getting um the exact move you want. At the
Sure.
end of the day, the cinematography or the camera movement or all that, it's supplemental to the emotion that's on the image or the
Mhm.
scene or the characters or the individuals that are being recorded. And I think that is something that I've taken away and brought into my narrative work is obviously you want it to look and feel to service the story as best as possible, but none of that truly matters if you're getting distracted by how pretty it looks and you're not remembering the essence and the core of what the story is supposed to be about.
Sure. I mean, it's got to be what the motivation starts from the core, the written material. You reminded me of a story. I think I hope I'm not misremembering. There's a documentary about Mother Teresa, and there was a, a large error in the shooting, but it was a continuous shot, but you couldn't break it up. I remember talking with the editor about that, and they said it was true, and just because there was an error didn't make it less true. To cut it would have betrayed it.
Yeah,
And you kind of have to think like what's best for the story, for I mean, that's the subject, but in even in narrative, the character, if there's a moment there and it's the right moment, but it's not technically perfect, as a decision making process, like you have to honor the character, honor the moment.
absolutely. That was something I kind of learned. So when I did apply to film school, I got into the Master Cinematography program at Chapman back in 2014. And it was a really eye-opening experience. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but one of the things I learned quickly was what you thought was the best shot in terms of cinematography wasn't always necessarily the shot that the director chose. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
he chose the shot where him or her chose the shot where the focus buzzed or was out, or maybe the pan wasn't quite perfect, but it was about the emotion of the talent with the
Mm-hmm.
actor, and what was best for servicing the story. And um, I think that's something that, as a cinematographer, you need to balance. I mean, obviously you want to perfect your craft, you want to do the best to your ability, but I am always 100% of the belief that the story is always what's going to
Mm-hmm.
uh drive the message, but also the emotion. And that is the key, is
Yeah.
we're trying to evoke emotion into our audience. And um if you're getting caught up in the visuals or in the technical side and all that kind of stuff, you sometimes get distracted by that so much that you're losing track of what you're trying to tell as a story.
Yeah. And it's, if you can leave your ego, and the thing is, it's a balancing act. There's an certain amount of confidence that I think is required, in the job description of a cinematographer, an appreciation of that beautiful image. But you can't, like you were saying, in service of story. And then, how do you reconcile that with a shot that's in service of your reel? A younger cinematographer might say, but this makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing. And if you sort of
Yeah,
just sort of let that ego disappear, and you collaborate and realize that it's not all about you. It's some of it is, and some of it's about the actors, and some of it's about the directors and the writers. But it's true, like if you can focus on this larger thing that you're trying to really sort of bring to fruition, everybody's in service of that.
of
um
course. Yeah. I mean, when you're you can, I think I can speak for almost every cinematographer that you tell the AD 5 more minutes for lighting, 5 more minutes. And 5 more minutes is always never 5 minutes.
I'm
It's
sure.
always a little longer. But you get to a point where you realize those extra 5 minutes could have been an extra take. Those five
Hmm.
minutes could have been an extra
Good point.
setup.
Hmm.
It could have been something that you could put towards a further setup that if you really wanted to do that long 30-foot dolly track push in,
Hmm.
that's going to take time to set up. Well, you're going to have to pick and choose your shots. And so pick your battles. And it all comes back to, again, what services the story best. And, but that takes experience. I mean, when I first got into film school, I mean, I was, laying track for everything, lots of dolly moves, lots of movement that took time, and we had to work with that. But that's the beauty of film school, I guess, is that you get to make a few mistakes and then
Yeah.
learn and grow from that with your peers.
Zero consequence. Like that's to me,
Yeah.
that's the greatest thing is like you can screw everything up. And the worst thing that happens is you try again. Jason and I, he's not on screen, but he's here and probably laughing. We work with a cinematographer who is always the 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And, it's five is like 30. If
Yeah.
you're not on it, it's because I think in his, concept of things, it can always be better. And sometimes it just has to be what it is. And I've noticed that he's very seldom satisfied. And I used to look at that like, don't you like this shot? Isn't it great? And it's like, but in his mind, it's like he's always seeing how it could be better. And I've seen as he's grown, he's been doing this a long time. He's more accepting of what he's doing and less critical of the things that could be better. Like it is what it is, and that's just growing as an artist.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing one of like many cinematographers' idols, Roger Deakins, say once that like no movie of his has ever looked like what he pictured in his head.
None.
And the moment I heard that, it's like, okay, it makes sense.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I don't think there's many films, let alone shots that I've done that look exactly how I pictured it. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean like, the execution was off or it's just the physical world is a little different than what we have going on in our heads. And
Hmm.
but I think that's also the beauty of it is making it work with so many people involved. There's so many cogs in the machine, and um, what becomes the reality is sometimes even better than what you picture in your head. You just have to embrace it and kind
Sure.
of get outside of that bubble.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. Like, I come from the days when you couldn't even see what you were doing
Yeah,
until it
yeah,
came back from the lab. And you had to
yeah.
hope that it was the right thing or as good as you hoped or in focus or better. And it's like there's an acceptance. It's an interpretation and there's no wrong answer. Well, there are probably some, but they're interpretations of what you're doing. I want to talk about the current film that you were co-DP on or co-cinematographer on seems really interesting. And it was like a pretty major creative and technical challenge. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project?
The City of Dreams is quite the journey. This film originally started main unit production at the end of 2018.
Wow.
I was brought on board originally by the cinematographer, my co-cinematographer Alejandro Chavez, extremely talented cinematographer, who we just really liked each other's work on Instagram, and he reached out to me one day and asked if I'd like to be the second unit DP on this small indie or what
Hmm.
he an indie film of that time. And
But you hadn't met before. He just was an
we'd never
admirer of
met.
your Instagram. So
Yeah.
that is I've never heard of somebody landing a job from like a DM. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I mean, luckily, taking a quick step back from my days at Chapman, my thesis film at Chapman University, it's called Esta es tu Cuba.
Hmm.
We were very, very fortunate to win a good amount of awards. The film won a Student Academy Award, an
Hmm.
Emmy. We played at Cannes and Sundance and a few others. We were nominated for a BAFTA. So those kind of opportunities kind of maybe elevated my work a little bit,
Hmm.
just to be recognized. And I think that's how we connected was, through the sphere of Instagram before all these algorithms took over and kind of killed Instagram. And so, yeah, I feel like back even 5 years ago, the platform was a little bit more of an incubator for creatives, like networking. And yeah, he reached out to me, and I was happy to serve under him as the second unit. And then I was the B camera operator on main unit as well for the LA unit. So it was quite the experience jumping in right away. We were only probably about a week and a half from principal photography when I came on board. So a lot of the camera package was already developed. Our director, Mo, he had already pretty much shot the entire film on his iPhone.
Wow.
A ton of pre-production in that regard, and very particular about the framing, the movement, especially because there's a chase sequence middle of the film through Los Angeles that requires, very precise wipes and pans and transition points, because while it looks like a 8-minute oneer sequence, it's probably about 10 to 12 shots. And um in order to know where those transition points are, he just shot it with his iPhone and edited it together over a course of many months just to get a feel for the movement. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I was brought on board by Alejandro, and our very first days were shooting those chase sequences in downtown LA.
These are
And it
multiple
was
camera, right? There were like was this the first time you were on a shoot that had, I think, what, up to four cameras rolling at the same time?
um probably not my first, but it was definitely my first in terms of like doing stunt sequences as a second unit, like
Hmm.
having an individual jump out of a 3 or 4 story building into, like, 15 feet of padding, and working with the stunt coordination team and multiple camera angles and making sure none of them are in each shot, but also the cameras are um, far away for the safety of the performers, the stunt performers. That was,
Hmm.
as somebody, I had been out of school for about just under a year, so it was grad school for just under a year, so it was a big it was a big moment for me. And I'm really grateful for getting that opportunity. I mean, I also just I had operated a lot of handheld in film school, but the handheld that I had done was, I would say, traditional Hollywood handheld, where it's resting on your shoulder,
Hmm.
viewfinder, and you're more it's more eye level. Whereas because of our character Ari, um, being it's a
The
film
boy,
about
yeah.
child
Hmm.
trafficking, we wanted to show the perspective from a lower angle. And so a lot of the film is actually cradled and kind of at a lower angle. And that was
Hmm.
something that I learned an awful lot from watching Alejandro, and he helping me with my operating skills
Hmm.
into learning how to operate through a kind of a cradle. No easy rig or anything, just like we had an Ari Alexa stripped to the bare with a Teradek and follow
Hmm.
focus, and we had a big master prime, usually typically the 18 on the front, and we it was just about the movement. It was about feeling
Hmm.
it, the intuition, the watching the talent and where they moved. But also it was very laid out because of Mo's detailed iPhone kind of edits.
Hmm. So this was just you were holding on to like a handle, and then,
Yeah.
or you hold,
Yeah, handle on
wow,
top, and then
uh,
your arm,
you're
or
on the
your
lens.
second hand is on the, either on the lens or on the bottom of the body. We'd obviously
Hmm.
have a focus puller and stuff, but when we were doing those chase sequences in LA, or downtown LA, the Fashion District, they were um so much interference because, it's a very densely populated area. We had tear deck arrays and everything, but because we were trying to cover multiple city blocks, and sometimes in this one, or we definitely had trouble with the frequencies at times, and we had to
Hmm.
lay out multiple arrays throughout the blocks just to get those signals. But and then sprinting full speed down the street while doing whip pans and trying to keep the level, and it was an extreme challenge, but it was also super gratifying when we got the shot, because it was a different type of operating than I was used to at the time, but it's now some way that I've incorporated so much into my work thanks to them.
And you didn't use an easy rig or a steady camera or anything just because it was just too much to have around. It just
Yeah,
wouldn't allow you the
it's
nimble.
exactly. It's pretty. I do use easy rigs occasionally, or ready rigs and the sort. But honestly, they can kind of have a little bit of a floaty feel
Hmm.
to them. And they're also can kind of be bulky when you have something above your head and you're trying to fit through narrow and tight spaces, or you're trying to rotate really quick or do a 360. You're constrained by this vest and this arm. And there's something, yes, it's a heavier camera than an iPhone, but there's something so freeing about being able to quickly move the camera and move your body
Hmm.
to get that moment, especially in a chase sequence, but also in very intimate settings where you don't want to have a lot of gear and gunk around the talent. And you want to be able to do a subtle push in maybe on a very intimate moment without getting in the way of the talent's performance. And that's something that having a very stripped down, bare camera like that was gave us that opportunity.
Hmm. No, it sounds great. I mean, they make a mini also, or they
Yeah,
used to.
we shot on the Alexa Mini. Yeah, it was
Oh, okay.
the Alexa Mini and mostly Master Prime or all Master Primes, but
Hmm.
mostly the 18. We did do some like 32 and 35, occasionally the 50 for coverage, but it was
Hmm.
mostly a wider angle film. And I think it was it helps so much in terms of getting you into the these intense situations that our talent Jesus or the character Jesus was going through. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a pretty insane journey through a underground sweatshop in Los Angeles to being tortured to desperately trying to escape. And Mo's intention was always to try to keep the audience there and experiencing it with him. So
Hmm.
none of us, or not many of us, I would say, have been tortured or gone through any of those struggles that these individuals have. And I think Mo's constant was to make sure that we were trying to keep the audience in that sphere so they could feel what Jesus was going through.
Do you think an 18 gives you more just like a constant perspective? Like there's something POV about that size? Or is it just that you knew you were on a running gun and focus would be, an easier get with the 18?
I think a little bit of both. I can't speak for the original choice of the lens. That was very much Alejandro and Mo, but I know Alejandro came up working with like Chivo, and
Hmm.
so and inspired by Chivo, and so his inspiration kind of inspired us as well in terms of the camera movement, the
Hmm.
intimacy of being close on the 18. It did also help while doing handheld and cradling like that. We did have a 2% framing on our 2:1 aspect ratio. We had a 2% crop factor added
Hmm.
already into our framing on the
Oh,
monitor.
okay.
So
Uh-huh.
when we went into post production, we used that to help stabilize any or reframe any kind of adjustments that we might have needed. It's not much of a percentage,
Hmm.
but when you shoot open gate area raw, it gives you a lot of information and a little bit of wiggle room once we get into post to just kind of stabilize a little bit without getting too crazy.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like an incredible creative and technical experience. You said you just got out of school. Were you overwhelmed at all at like the leap that you were taking here, or is it just, it's Hoosiers, it's the same court, it's the same net, it's the same camera. How do you deal with that?
A little bit of both. I mean, it was definitely this had also been my first time at being a second unit DP, and so it was definitely an adjustment in terms of working under another cinematographer, but also and completing their vision, but also you have a whole department and keys that you're working with to get the stuff you need to finish done. And
Hmm.
so it's constant communication with Alejandro and Mo to make sure that what I'm doing still sticks within the visual time and frame of what they're trying to achieve. You don't want to be putting up random lights that don't fit with the tone or the look of the main unit.
Hmm.
And that was so when I transitioned to the main unit, that was also just a unique challenge of maintaining the look that Alejandro had established and carrying that forward into the pickups and reshoots that we did later on.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Are there other aspects of this particular film or another film that you worked on that you found particularly special that you want to talk about?
Well,
this one's
yeah.
pretty amazing, this one.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, still staying on City of Dreams for a second. I am really grateful for the opportunity that obviously this film took many, many years to make. And I think that's a testament to showing to indie filmmakers that it takes time to make a movie. Sometimes it takes longer than you think it will take, and that don't be discouraged by that. Just be committed, because stay true to the message, and be patient, because yeah, I mean, we obviously COVID really kind of put a standstill to the idea of doing pickups and reshoots and things like that. So when it finally came back, and when Mo asked me to come back to do the reshoots and move up to a co-DP on the film, that was a challenge. That was a challenge to maintain the similar look, but also you want to serve the previous DP Alejandro's look to the best of your ability to maintain a consistent look. But you also need to listen to Mo's where he wants the camera, and where he specifically sees the story being told. And so it is a little bit of a balancing act coming in, but it's also I'm super grateful for everything I learned from the two of them. And I've carried it forward in so many of my other projects, especially in terms of intimacy of handheld and understanding movement, either moving in with the camera or wrapping around, or when to pull back, and to kind of dance with the actors and their performance. And there's nothing else like it. I mean, there's obviously dolly, Steadicam, all those kind of things have their places, but there is something so intimate about handheld that if I could, I'd probably shoot most movies handheld, as long as it services the story.
Right. Well, I'm always shocked, because I've been revisiting Kieslowski's films, and so much of it is handheld. It's almost you have to pull, his storytelling is so good, you'd have to pull yourself out of the story to really notice. But it's majority of what I'm seeing is handheld. It's not, I don't know. There's loud handheld, like look at me handheld, which is fine. And then there's like, you're in there. It's something very, like you're saying, like there's very little separation between me and the audience and the story itself, the drama and the characters. That always astounded me, because like, it's just, it's hard. First of all, it's hard to do. But it's really effective. I was going to ask, Mo, I guess, could never have shot this on an iPhone. I know that Danny Boyle's doing 28 years later. It's like the most expensive film shot on an iPhone in history, which doesn't win him any awards.
Doesn't look just like an iPhone.
Oh my God, it's like no, it's almost like that's their just sort of media capture device, basically. Yeah. I mean, it's it's all, there's so much gear on that thing, but it's it certainly weighs like Tangerine was a great start
example.
Exactly. And it's not like I forgot the director's name, but he just won the Palme d'Or. Forgot his name. At any rate, it's not that he chose to, but he had something to say, and that was the tool that allowed him to say it. And when the second movie, third movie came along, I'm sure someone was like, "Why don't you shoot Florida Project on a phone?" He's like, "Well, I don't have to." But there are tools at every level to express yourself.
Tools at every level, and I think it's also the tool that best fits the story for that particular moment. I think what made Tangerine so unique in shooting on an iPhone was, again, it goes back to intimacy and being able to shoot at the locations they were able to, because they were shooting on an iPhone. They were able to get away with a lot of locations that you might not be able to with a full-on, film crew with big cameras. And so is just like any other tool in the business. I mean, we have so many different cameras at our disposal today and still film. I mean,
Mhm.
I love shooting film when I have the opportunity, and I love how we slow down a set when we shoot on film. It's like it's a constant reminder to crews because
Mhm.
they're not used to that anymore. They're used to nowadays shooting the rehearsal. But I think that's kind of honestly one of my favorite things about filmmaking is that you can use so many different paintbrushes to try to achieve your what you're trying to tell and trying to show. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean one way is right or wrong. Um, it's up to you on whether or not that's right or wrong and how you execute it. You can shoot a whole movie on an iPhone and it might look gorgeous and be the perfect thing if it fits the tone of the story and fits what's the messaging, if you utilize it to the best of its ability. But then there's other instances where maybe that iPhone isn't going to tell the story as well as shooting on 16 millimeter film or shooting
Mhm.
on a large format digital sensor camera and using Steadicam or Technocranes and everything like that.
Sure.
It always comes down to the essence of what you're trying to tell and make the audience feel.
Yeah, I think Full Frontal, Steven Soderbergh's movie,
Yes.
addressed some of that because it was multi-format and there were stories
Yeah.
that wanted to be told in a more conventional way, and there were parts of the story that wanted to be, I don't know if they were shot in digital video or iPhone. It's probably pre-iPhone tech, but maybe
Hmm.
digital video. The whole Dogma 95 movement really established the kind of stories that lent themselves to that kind of treatment. It's yeah, I think it's like it's the right paintbrush, right? I mean, that's a great way to put it.
Absolutely. And I think we're in an age where the audience's visual language skills are probably at their highest. I mean, we have so many different TV shows nowadays with different aspect ratios and different ways of shooting and crossing the line and different eye lines. And you could say that's like 10 years ago, maybe some of that would be considered sloppier filmmaking, but I
Mhm.
don't necessarily think so. I think the audiences today are very in tune with understanding, trying different ways of shooting things, and they accept it. Obviously, it still has to fit cohesively, but I think audiences are much more comfortable with different aspect ratios, different frame rates, different wide angle lenses than maybe they were because they've been introduced to it over the last 10, 15 years, and especially now in the digital space,
Mhm.
like through TV. It's really opened up unique opportunities. I mean, how many films today are we being able to shoot on 4:3 again?
I was
Or
gonna say,
open
I
gate?
still cringe when I see like I'm like, have we not moved past this, people? But then it's like, well, no, this was the format that I wanted for
But you
that
see a
shot,
film
for
like
that
Son
close
of
up.
Saul, that's
Hmm.
Son of Saul that shoots in 4:3, and you understand that the reason why it's shot at such a tight, claustrophobic is number one for budget, so they didn't have to show as much, but it also keeps you so intimately in touch with what's going on.
Right.
And again, it just goes back to utilizing the tool aspect ratio, framing, lens choices, camera package, lighting.
Hmm.
All of it comes back to how does it best serve the way you want to tell a story. And
Right.
I think that's what gets me going in the morning.
That's great. It's almost, it reminds me a little bit like listening to U2 evolve, whether you like them as a band or not. But they ended up having so many tools to use later in their career because they could sound like their earlier stuff. They could sound electronic. They had kind of like it's just a larger vocabulary for them to
Yeah,
like pull from. Um, I can't thank you enough for giving some of your time today.
thank
I
you.
guess I don't know if this is a question that Filmmaker you asks. I'll ask it if there's something that you've seen recently that it's like go, do not pass, go out there and check this out right now, or if you've just been watching stuff that you don't like. But anything good?
I do appreciate that. Again, it goes back to I I love what a lot of cinematography is currently doing. I do think it's interesting that we're seeing a unique way of stories being told, and I think that's a great thing. I also do think we need to caution how much we're sometimes letting cinematography take over telling the story nowadays and making it more visually striking than maybe the story is asking for. That's a trend that I
Mhm.
am noticing, where the cinematography maybe is taking over more of what the story is trying to tell, using, you know, gag tools like a probe lens and things like that, where maybe it doesn't service the story, but it's cool. And so I think that's kind of where we're at in terms of cinematography today, is that balancing act between experimentation, but also not going too far, and
well, it's
just
all
being
it's
what's for the real.
it's Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul's fault, because they were able to do that without it like looking like a gag shot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people are like, that's what I like, you know, and it's a tough balance to strike. Well, thanks again. I hope that you are, you know, get yourself more steady on dry land now that you're back from your long boat trip. And yeah, it's just really a pleasure to meet you, talk to you. I'm sure we're going to see great things. And I look forward to seeing them. Well, that is it for this week, everybody. Again, make sure to follow and subscribe and like and do all the things that you do on social media to stay in the loop on all of the goings on at Filmmaker U. I am Josh Apter, sitting in for Gordon Burkell, and thanks again for watching.